To me too. Great. Okay, folks. Then I'm going to welcome all of you. My name is Rick Ufford Chase. I use he, him, and his as my pronouns. I have been a long time member of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship and involved in the life of the Peace Fellowship in various ways. And over the last 3.5 years or so, at various moments, I've been quite involved in Presbyterians for Abolition, though I confess to all of you that I've been less involved because of some personal work obligations that have come up in the last 6 or 8 months. And so it's a little bit ironic that I've been asked to host this evening because I haven't been particularly involved in these last few months, and I don't know personally any of our speakers tonight. So I'll be learning along with all of you as they share their stories, which I'm greatly looking forward to. So I want to just kind of walk you through a little bit of what we have in mind for the evening, and then I'm going to open us in prayer. The first thing I want to say is maybe we could just ask the Presbyterians for Abolition folks who have been active in Presbyterians for Abolition to just raise your hands. Actually, I'm not sure we can see that because we're pinned. Can we see it if we... Can we unpin us for a moment so we can kind of get a sense of each other? There we go. Okay, so if you're active in Presbyterians for Abolition, would you raise your hand or send a little heart into the air or something so we all know who you are? Yeah, I see a handful of people, 6 or 8 people probably. So I'm so grateful to all of you. There's been several generations already in 4 years of the history of Presbyterians for Abolition, of different people stepping up and showing leadership, which is in fact exactly what we like to see. It's quite healthy. And so we're grateful for those folks who are animating Presbyterians for Abolition right now. And maybe I'll just pause there. And before we go any further, let's pause for a word of prayer, shall we? Just invite you to take a few slow and easy breaths. And maybe let whatever has been foremost in your mind this afternoon or this evening kind of slide through your mind and release it. And bring our focus to bear on this time together. Our loving God, we invite you into our midst, mindful of all of the ways in which our world is hurting, and particularly mindful this evening of the reality for so many people who are incarcerated or whose loved ones are incarcerated, who are in the midst of the carceral circle that exists in our country today. We ask, oh God, that you would be with those people, wherever they may be, that they would feel your healing presence. And also that you would make us not just mindful, but edgy, angst-filled, committed to the work of changing a system that has targeted so many for so long, and to seek new alternatives and to be a part of creating something different and beautiful in place of this system that has been so destructive for so many. Be with us now this evening as we hear these stories and reflections. Open our hearts and our minds that we might see and understand who you are, and who we are called to be. In Christ's name, amen. So just a few odds and ends that you should be aware of. We'd ask that you be sure that your screen is showing if you possibly can, and that you have your names and pronouns on the screen. And please be mindful of one another's pronouns as we address one another, and to try and be thoughtful about using the pronouns that people have identified. There are some accessibility possibilities. If you need a transcription this evening, you can click live captions on the bar that's usually on the bottom of a Zoom screen. If you have questions about other kinds of access, you can private message Deanna, who is doing much of our tech work this evening, and she will do her best to be helpful to you. And you can use the chat to let us know if we're going too fast or if you have a particular question. We're not going to try and cover every single question, I suspect, that comes up, because we're going to do our best to privilege the folks who have given of their time to come and share about their stories and their expertise tonight. A brief history of Presbyterians for Abolition. In 2020, there were a group of Presbyterians who began gathering primarily online by Zoom and trying to figure out how to begin to organize Presbyterians, our own people in our congregations, and to help people become more comfortable with language around abolition of the prison industrial complex, and trying to figure out how to move money and people to support hands-on work of folks who are really doing their best to support people who are caught up in the carceral system. This is a third quarterly event that the team that meets regularly as Presbyterians for Abolition has created. And we hope to continue to create regular touch points for folks to engage, where we'll be able to highlight the amazing work that's happening all over the country and spend time growing community and creating space together for practice and discernment. So this evening, we're going to hear from our panelists on some alternatives to incarceration, and we'll have some time for conversation, followed up by at least a brief question and answer period from all of you who are on the call tonight. And you are welcome to write some of those questions into the chat, and we'll try and close with an actual call to action. So, Lori, I think you were going to jump in here. Is that right?
I am indeed, and wonderful to be with you all tonight. Thank you, Rick. Thank you to our panelists. I'm Lori Leiter-Bright. I'm Executive Director of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, and I'm just excited to be diving into this work with you all. So we want to start off tonight by asking each of you to put one word into the chat. What is the word that comes to mind when you think of alternatives to incarceration? Just one word. Everybody put something in the chat, please.
Beautiful.
Gorgeous. Thank you all.
And thank you, Lori. If Lori did not have children for whom this hour of the evening is a time for activity and some level of loud and boisterous activity, I'm sure Lori would actually be providing much more of our evening facilitation. So I'm grateful, Lori, that you're with us. So abolition. In Luke 4, Jesus says he came to proclaim release to the captives and the prisoners. In Matthew 25, Jesus says we will know and speak with Jesus when we are with those, visiting those, supporting those who are in prison. In Acts, we see several moments of jailbreaks that appear to be led by the Holy Spirit. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest that they're not just led by the Holy Spirit, but perhaps by a band of followers of Jesus who take matters into their own hands. That's abolition. Abolition is the belief that the punishment system is not providing the correction or rehabilitation or healing that is needed, and that we need alternatives to the current system. So tonight, we have 4 panelists who have experiences. 4, or do we have 3, Lori? Do I have that right? Anyway, we
3.
have 3. So we have 3 panelists with us tonight, I'm sorry, who have experiences with alternatives both inside and outside the carceral system. We'll begin with some comments by Crystal Mellow from a nonprofit called Roanoke Community Bail Fund that provides bail funds to keep poor people from being locked up in prison before trial. Then we'll hear from Judge Gino Williams, who handles behavior health dockets in the New River Valley in Western Virginia. And we also have Dr. Heather Sattler with us, who's involved in restorative justice practices as an educator and practitioner, mostly focused on youth and repair harm circles. So we're so grateful to the 3 of you for your willingness to be here and to share your stories with us this evening. And I don't want to waste any time. I want to get right into it. So I'm going to begin by asking Crystal and then Gino and then Heather, each to take up to 5 minutes to introduce yourselves and to talk a little bit about your work and just kind of locate us and offer us some context for what your experience is and what you hope to share tonight. So I wonder if maybe you could begin us, Crystal. Would that be okay?
Sure. It's my biggest fear to go first, but here we go.
You go, Crystal.
So I just want to say thank y'all so much for putting this together, and to the Presbyterians out there, like y'all really do rock. Like in this work, it's really, as someone who grew up in church and left the church, y'all do give me faith that there are good people, Christians out there, not judgmental. I love y'all asking people to use pronouns, because what does that hurt? That's not hurting anybody to respect that. So I just wanted to say how good that made me feel being on this with y'all tonight. Like this was it's just really good. So my name's Crystal. I do not have a nonprofit. um, it's a goal by June to try to do this. And so Scott can call me one day and I can say, yes, I am now a nonprofit. But the work, so we started in 2017 with a Mama's Day bailout. First, we started doing work around Roanoke City Jail. They were ranked in the top 10 worst jails in the nation. They had multiple deaths in that jail. One of the mothers was at an event that we had, and her son had died in jail, mental health issues, and was on suicide watch and was allowed to have a sheet, and he took his life. So that's how this all started, and we had a couple fundraisers, raised very little money, but to try to get some moms out of jail for a Mother's Day bailout. In that time, we started communicating with people in the Roanoke City Jail through the Smart Jail Mail system, and we're just seeing that was a need. People were in jail for $1,000 bond, and for somebody not to be able to come up with $100 that they'll never be able to get back. And that is a grocery bill for the week. That is an electric bill. That's $100 that somebody could be missing on their rent. So community bail funds have been happening across the country. It's not a new thing, but it is new for Southwest Virginia, or not. We're lucky to have it. And so the Mama's Day bailout went really well. We did have to use a bondsman for one or two of the moms, but we did have enough money to get 4 out altogether. And then in 2022, with the George Floyd uprising, our names got put on a mail list, and we ended up getting a lot more money, way more money than we had only raised, like maybe $3,000 in a year or two, and that helped us get up to $30,000.
Wow.
During that time, so we've been continuing to get people out of jail, and when I say we, it's like me and one other person at this time, because getting help for this work is hard. Getting people to be willing to go to, put their name on a piece of paper for someone you've never met before is hard. But what we do for folks, what I personally try to do for folks, is stay with them when they're released. Make sure they have a ride home. Make sure they have my number. I've been able to take people to court. I've been able to sit with people in court. I've been able to take people to lawyers or to doctor's appointments. And in this process, I've learned that things are really hard for people who don't have cars, who don't have license, don't have money, don't live on a bus route. So just one person taking 2 hours out of their day to go and drive them to court or sit in court, and sometimes court can be way longer than 2 hours. But just one person not giving up on them, I think, is what's been so meaningful to me and keeps me in it is when people write me later and they're like, thank you so much. Are we still going to have that cookout one day? Or getting the smart jail mail and people like, so I'll use a lot of my money at times to order to get credits to give to people so they can keep in contact with loved ones or whatever. Or me and another steadfast person, we'll try to raise money. $100 gets 10,000 credits. $200 keeps us in business for the month on handing out credits. We used to give 500 out to each person 3 times a month, but now we're down to 300 because the word's gotten out there and people are reaching out to us nonstop. And just to hear, thank y'all so much. Thank you. We have to become a nonprofit because that work is important. Being able to give them, we set up a list that we can give people information on who hires felons when they get out of jail. These are places that are friendly to hiring people when they get out of jail. What rehabs there are, places they can go in Roanoke and the surrounding area, because now a lot of our emails come through the Western Regional Jail. Which they just shut their system down. They no longer have smart jail mail, and I'm not sure it's gonna go through a GTL, and there may not be messaging in that, and that's a shame. It's just a good resource for people to have to stay in touch with families. But
So
yeah,
I'm gonna jump in there, Crystal, if it's okay.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
we'll ask Gino and Heather to introduce themselves, and then we'll circle back around if that's all right.
absolutely. Thank you.
This is fabulous, and stay right there. We'll be right back. Judge Gino, will you jump in and share a little bit about your context?
Sure, I'll be glad to. And it's he, his, him. I can't change anything where I'm at on this particular device. So I'm technologically inactive over here at this part. Anyway, I'm Gino Williams. I'm the chief judge in the 27th Judicial District. I've been a district court judge for 21 years. We are working with a behavioral health docket now that we've had for about 3 years. It actually is tied into some work we've been doing for about 15 years that eventually will tie in from pretrial, actually pre-charge through pre-trial and then into the process that we're in with this behavioral health docket, which is actually post-adjudication. And I'll get into a little bit more of the detail on that. I prosecuted for 10 years before I went on the bench, and I was a defense attorney for 10 years before that. And the whole process of this behavioral health docket is to avoid any incarceration for the people that are in the docket. It's for seriously mentally ill people. We obviously are not touching people who have milder issues, mainly because we do not have the room or the staff to take care of that. But anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about what we do and everything when we get to that part of it.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Heather, will you jump in, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and it's wonderful to start with a blessing, so thank you for that. My name is Heather Sattler. I'm here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and there's a vigorous FIFA game going on in the other room, so if you hear my son, that's what's happening over there. I have been an educator for 27 years and working in high school, teaching at the college level, and working in the community. And so I was so blessed to learn the work of restorative practice from my first teacher, Yvette Morel, who hails from the Blackfoot Nation. And I always share that because I'm so grateful for her way. And she really taught me how this work is truly, I think about the practice of circle in particular is very important to this work because it cultivates this way of being where we remember our inherent connection with each other, and we further develop that deep listening for ourselves and each other and build that community, which is the essential part of this work. Someone referenced Dr. King's words, the beloved community, which we are. And so that we have this community so that when we cause harm or we are harmed, which happens in relationship, we have space to heal, right? So my work primarily was working with young people at the Alliance School of Milwaukee. This is a small charter school in Milwaukee. I was there for 11 years. And the work that I was really blessed to do was to, once I learned from Yvette, I basically said to her, Yvette, I would love to take a look at what I've learned and think about how we're teaching this and how we assess it. So I pulled out all the skills, created sort of a course flow, and I said to her, does this reflect what you've taught me? And she said, yes. And I said, what do you think? And she said, keep going. So I did. And my work has always been working with young people to invite them into their wisdom and their creativity and what they want to do in the world, and look at who is asking for their wisdom and how we can exchange that. So essentially, over a period of a number of years, I facilitated the creation of a whole school restorative practice community where our young people were creating and facilitating circles to build community, and also when there were issues to heal relationships. And what really supported that was this larger community of adults who were committed to practicing this work as well. So we held space with each other, we held space with our students so that they could then be the people who led the work. And that involved our parents, our families, and etc. And so over a number of years, my students and I reached out around the city and around the country and started to teach other people. We also worked in the city of Milwaukee with I have another work partner named Sharon Lerman. And actually many of my former students are my work partners too. And they range in age from 18, and actually my children work with me too. So my son's 14. So from 14 to 40, I have these wonderful former students and current students who are partners in this work. But what we did in Milwaukee is, because we had taught so many people from different organizations, we aimed to bring people together. So we worked with the libraries to cultivate spaces where young people would create and facilitated circles and get paid for their time to build community in the library space. And also teaching the librarians so that they could understand what space was being held. And the goal of these circles, the young people called them wisdom circles, is to, again, build that community. And then if there's an issue in the neighborhood, the free community room is a space where a repair harm circle could happen if need be. We also worked with, we were called in to work with the district attorney. And so we work with them to help to set up, there's a program in Milwaukee, a community conferencing program created over 20 years ago by David Lerman, who learned from Kay Pranis. And so there was a community conferencing program, and our feeling was that young people should be the ones who are engaging and facilitating those circles. And so we worked very hard with the DA and another community organization to create a position so that former students could be facilitating those deferred prosecutions and also doing work in the community. So Dorian Tellis, who's not here tonight, is a former student, and she actually worked in one of the youth facilities teaching young people this work. We also work with Project Return and the Free Movement. And both of those organizations, we've learned about the model in Vermont, which we can talk about more. We learned about the community model there, where people were working with people who are currently incarcerated, and then working with people who are returning citizens, and working with teaching folks so that they could be the ones leading the work. So at Project Return and Free, people who are returning citizens learn the work and facilitate circles for people who are returning citizens. And there's also circles at churches in Milwaukee, where it's a monthly circle facilitated by a person who is a returning citizen and someone from the community. And it's a community kind of coming home, we're here to support you circle. But then places like Project Return and Free also hold those regular circles. There's a circle every day, virtual. And I'm not sure where the status is with the in-person circles. This is growing. Ray Mendoza is another partner. I could go on and on about people and partners, but Ray is really working to bring this work together in Milwaukee. Never ever did I think I would be working with teaching the police, but we taught police officers, former students and me, in the community division, with the intention that they would refer, instead of arresting young people, that they would refer them to restorative justice. So we've worked with Judge Ellen Brostrom and others in children's court to create a diversion program. And so it's been a slow process, but our vision is that there would be, we looked at a particular working with one area in Milwaukee where young people could be referred, whether in the school or whether in the community. We referred as a diversion into restorative practice. And there's a program in Dane County, which we've learned a lot from. And we've been trying to connect programs that exist with people in power here in Milwaukee so that they can learn from people. And we've been trying to connect people with each other, and a lot of good work has happened. There's a lot of work happening in Milwaukee Public Schools, and I consult and teach there. So I know I feel like I'm talking a lot. This is a huge web, you all. There's so many pieces to it, and there's so many wonderful people who are doing this good work. But I guess what I invite you to think, and I'll stop here, is how this is the whole community engages in this work. And I kind of envision like the grandmas on the block, the young people on the block, like we are all holding circle space. And so we would actually do that at a community center in Milwaukee. And it's a way for people to hold space and have young people leading the space. And it's very powerful for grown folks to see young people leading so powerfully. I'll stop there because there's so much more and I could keep going.
Thank you, Heather. You know, I think you've actually kind of given us a great place to jump off from for another question. And I'll just say my intention is to engage all three of you in a conversation for the next, I don't know, 12 or 15 minutes total. And then I'd like to save as much time as we can to actually open up for other folks to ask very specific questions if they have them, or more general questions, so that people come away with the whatever it is they really need to get out of the evening. But Heather, I think you've provided kind of an interesting entree into a direction my brain was going, which is, I wonder if you could, if each of you could talk a little bit about kind of what your point of entrance was, with a mind toward kind of how do we create points of entrance for people who have not been involved in this work in any way? Or maybe the question could also be phrased, where did the moment begin for you of questioning the way the carceral system kind of functions at the moment, right? And thinking that alternatives might actually be possible. Because I think so much of our work in the church is really all about trying to figure out how we move people from what they assume can only be the way things work into a different way of engaging. So I don't know, I'll just throw it out there and ask you to answer in whatever order you'd like to.
I'll be glad to start with that. You know, actually, ever since I started practicing law, I mean, you know, we have a huge mental health crisis in every single jail. My clients, people I prosecuted, there's a lot of codependency problems too. And it was just something that I wanted to eventually work into. And so it's been my entire career in law, both as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, and then on the bench, just trying to get mentally. We talk about behavioral health, but it really is a mental health issue with codependency, and really wanting to keep people who are having those issues out of the jail. It's been a long time ago, and we had to wait because part of our processes are broken. I had to have court space, which meant I had to have another judge so I could create some docket time. And it took us 8 years to get to the point where we had enough docket time that we could establish the program. And so, I guess my answer is ever since I started practicing law.
And can I push just a little further, Judge Gino?
Sure.
Can you just talk a little bit about the specifics of how that program functions? Because it sounds to me like it's actually almost interwoven into the criminal justice system in some way. Can you just describe that for us?
It is. It is. It's a post adjudication docket. And again, we've got pieces of this that are sort of broken down right now that we eventually need to put together. I mean, that's the long-term goal of the whole process. But it's a post-adjudication docket for 18-year-olds. The Commonwealth's attorney, who has to be heavily into this because she's the gatekeeper. She has to approve the entrance because she's the one that has access to long-term criminal records. you get to the point you can't have a lot of really violent people in this. This is not that kind of program. And it is to take medium and high risk people for recidivism and trying to keep them out of the jail. And it's been fairly successful in the 3 years we've done it. We've had some people pull very short periods of time for relatively minor crimes, but most of the people in the program have stayed out of jail, have gotten treatment. We're getting ready to graduate our 4th person. Doesn't sound like a lot, but in the course of the 3 years that we've actually had it, it takes about 18 months to get somebody from the very beginning all the way through it, because you're building not only the initial contact, you got to build trust with everybody. They've got to be able to communicate with us, and it just takes forever to do that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Heather, what about you? Was there kind of a tipping point or a moment where your awareness began to shift? And can you talk a little bit about kind of how that happened for you and whether or not you see lessons in that for how we help craft or create those moments for other people?
Well, the moment I walked into school, I saw these amazing young people, and I'm like, holy cow, like there's Bells, there's Rose, so it was just so clear to me. And I saw so many creative young people who are so expressive, who are misunderstood. And my work has always been about, like, if someone's behaving in a certain way, there's a reason. So let's figure out, like, what's the reason? What do you need? Right. And how can you support yourself? What support do you need? And then there's an opportunity to take responsibility and look at healing. And we're all a necessary part of the community, right? So since I started teaching, well, actually, even before that, and I have to tell you, the magic of working with young people, I have been through many experiences. And one of them, there was a group of teachers at a Montessori school in Milwaukee. And we've done this for many judges, for people who are parole officers, and different groups of people. We would get calls for people who were interested in the work that we were doing. And so the young people would facilitate circle. And so we went to this one school. There were 60 teachers. The person wanted to introduce the work of restorative practice and said there are some people who are really excited. Some people are real skeptical. They think this is like some hippy dippy stuff. I'm like, okay, I know the people. So I invited this person to come sit with my students and me, and we held circle, and they asked questions of what they wanted. They crafted circle for this group of teachers. And then on their first day of professional development, my students had everybody in a big circle, broke them into smaller circles that kind of queued them up for the work that they were doing for the year, community building work, and thinking about what's your vision, what supported you in the past, what challenges you faced, how will you support yourself. Teachers were crying. They were so moved by the experience. And then we brought everybody back in a circle, and we had shown a video that the young people that we had made to talk about the work. And after that, everyone said, wow, this is incredible. So I think it's about creating an opportunity for people to experience sitting in a circle, or to experience a really profound conversation where there's a deep listening and a deep care. And that has been utterly transformational, because this work is something that we can talk about it, but really it's meant to, when we experience it, then when it touches our hearts, then we grow. And I've seen young people who are absolutely like, I'm not doing this. This is some bullshit, And I was like, yeah, you don't have to. And they're like, well, I don't want to be here. I'm like, well, you don't have to be. It's okay. And so like the resistance lessons, and people would join, and the people who were most resistant, once the experience touched their hearts, because I think the people who have the most resistance are the people who have really tender hearts and who have experienced a lot of pain. And so it's like when this work touches people's hearts, I've seen them become the biggest advocates and the most powerful facilitators, young people and grown people, older people.
Thank you, Heather. What about you, Crystal? You want to jump in?
So I first got into the system because, lifestyle. I've went to jail once for not paying a fine, but yeah, my parents were addicts, and so I've seen some courts and some jails, and then my daughter's father went to jail for 11 years for marijuana and coke. So I've lived it and seen, and I think that's why it's so important to keep these communications with families available. And they have come a long way, because we didn't have Zoom call or video visits back then. I didn't have a house phone because I couldn't afford one. So communication was horrible, and he was in West Virginia, and it was like a 5-hour drive. And so there wasn't a lot of togetherness. And when he got out, it was really hard, for a 16-year-old now who's, going to buck the system. So that taught me how important that family connection is, just because of my own experience. And I think that's what drives me to want to keep fighting to be able to put credits on people's books and small things like that. If you want to know how things are going in the world, go bail someone out of jail and sit on that bench and smoke, because someone's going to come up and ask you, don't smoke. That's probably terrible advice, but it does kind of make it hard for me to quit smoking, to be honest, because that's a conversation breaker. Someone comes up and says, hey, can I get a cigarette? And I'm like, yeah, here. And then an amazing conversation begins, and the things that we all have in common together are so ridiculously similar. It's just the conversations we're not having with the people who don't look like us or aren't living like us or any of those things. And so yeah, that's how I was brought into the jails and the courts. And I think that's just what makes me want to keep uh begging for money on Facebook for credits.
So, Crystal, I want to stick with you for a moment, and then maybe Judge Gino and Heather can answer a similar question. I want to know how did a transition happen from you being someone who is experiencing the challenges of that system to becoming proactive and an organizer to try and respond to that system? Like, where did that come from for you?
Well, again, my grandmother had custody of me a lot here in Virginia, which that was a small blessing because this is home. But to see my friends now still raising grandkids, the heroin problem is still a problem. I'm 48, getting ready to be 49, and I was a young one when this was going on. And to still see an opioid epidemic, to still see, here in Eastern Montgomery County, there are so many grandparents raising their children, or aunts and uncles, or other family members, or the neighbor. It's a problem. It hasn't gotten better. It's not getting better at all. And we'd be fools to pretend like it was. And so, how do you stop now? It's not even.
Mhm. Thank you, Crystal. What about you, Heather? What makes for an organizer? Someone who begins to actually educate and pull other people in and get them actively involved.
Well, I was thinking about, I appreciate the question that someone asked in the chat, and it's Ruth, thank you for your question. It's in line with what you're talking about. You're asking about, are the students in school, are they the people in trouble? What's discussed in Circle? Do they graduate from Circle? I don't think anybody graduates because we're always learning. But what I do want to say is that, and I'll focus specifically on school, since Crystal and Judge Gino are talking about spaces outside of school. I think that when we're talking about inviting people to do this work, it's people who are able to and willing to sit with themselves, people who are willing to take responsibilities, willing to heal. We all have stories about who we are based on our experiences in our family of origin, based on the bodies we're born into, right? And so some of those stories align with the loving truth of who we are, and some are painful and they're born from other people's pain. And so the work that we would do in the context of school and Circle is really grounding in how do we hold this circle inside of ourselves first? How do we hold space with other people? We're not here to heal other people. We're here to hold space and invite them to heal themselves, right? And create a space of welcoming and a space of transformation. And when we're able to transform within ourselves, then we're able to transform those systems around us. And so what happens when young people do this work, when we've done this work, and this is in the school, it's in the community, and this is the same for the adults with whom I've taught around the country. When people start to feel this work within themselves, right, and the first question we ask is, how does this live in your daily practice? How does this live within your family? And then there's these conversations about, how do I move through all these spaces, and what are the power dynamics involved, and how can something become healing, right? So in the space of school, some of the kids who get into the most mess and the most trouble are the most powerful leaders of this work, because they embrace it the most. And I know I'll save this story for later, but I was talking to another young person today. He's almost 30 now, and he and I were just talking on the phone, and he's somebody who was so committed to getting kicked out of our school. But Tina Owen Moore, who was our school leader at the time, instead of him getting kicked out of school, said, Heather, would you take him in your class? Nobody will take him, because he's cutting up all over the place. And so he sat down next to me. 3 years he was in my class, sat down next to me in circle, and he came in and like wanted to cut up a little bit, and I didn't have to, like, I didn't do anything. It's just the young people kind of looked at him like, we don't move that way here, y'all. We like, sit down. We see you, we love you, but you gotta get in your body. So with that, the young people started to do the work in the school, interrupt issues, started to go out and teach in the community, and then looking at, like, even working with their neighbors in the community and interrupting. So I think what ends up happening, and then we started to work at, how do you become an organizer? How do you engage in nonviolent action in a way to move systems? And so that's work that we deliberately studied and talked about like, what is the system? Let's talk about, like, deconstructing the system, where we live in it and how we move through it. So we went all the way from inside of ourselves, working with each other, working in the school, looking at what's going on in the world, and looking at larger systems that, by the way, are doing what they're designed to do, right? So we looked at, how do we interrupt that for real? So, and we talk about being strategic, so I feel like I talked longer than I get real excited about this, y'all.
You're doing great. You're doing great, Heather. Judge Gino, do you want to take the question the way I framed it? Is that helpful to you, or do you have something else, a different direction you want to go?
I think I come to this with a little bit of a unique problem, because I ethically can't do a lot of stuff to go out and push programs. I have to have permission from Richmond to do these things. The behavioral health docket in Montgomery County was established with permission from Richmond. Some of it was a little bit of a battle, because I wanted to do something else a little differently than what we're doing. But you get started, you do what you got to do to get things going. And it means that I can't be as proactive as I would like to be. There's a lot of stuff that I would like to do. I've had discussions with higher authority about things that we ought to be doing, and ways of dealing with these problems a little bit cleaner, and I think more efficiently, so that we can bring more people in. We're getting ready to expand our local Montgomery County, Virginia behavioral health docket to start a little bit of a regional approach. We're going to take in Floyd and Giles counties. And eventually, in our district, which has 10 localities, we're going to have 3 of these. They'll be regional as opposed to local, so we can expand it to more people. But that's about as proactive as I get to be, because of the ethics rules and things that we act on, that I act under. And I had to have the buy-in from the Commonwealth's attorney, from the defense bar, from the Community Service Board, and then we had to go get permission from the Supreme Court to establish the docket. So, when I'm being proactive in setting the docket up, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to do. Ultimately, I feel like I could be more proactive if I were in a different job. And that's just part of what judges do. We are limited ethically about how we can go about it, even if we see something that we'd like to change.
Yeah, thank you, Judge Gino. I'm sure a lot of people are resonating with that dilemma you feel, right?
Oh,
that we all,
it's every day.
And one of the things that's become so clear to me as I become more familiar and more comfortable with the language of prison abolition over the last 4 years is a recognition that none of us are clean. All of us are participant in the carceral system at this point, and in ways that most of us, including me, have not really examined in our lives. We were just raised to assume that things are the way they are and they can't change, and that the system is just, right? We even push it that far. Certainly, I was raised to believe that I live in a country where the system itself is just. And it's been such a shock to me in my mid 50s, now my late 50s, right, to become aware of just how privileged my own experience has been and how little I really understand about the way the system actually works. So I'm grateful to all three of you for that. I have one other question, but before I ask it and then open it up to others, I think you're probably all seeing in the chat that folks are dying to know how to be in further contact or how to be supportive. So like Crystal, folks have asked specifically, is there a Facebook page or some program through which you're raising money? If you just want to put that in the chat or reinforce it as you speak with folks in the next 20 minutes or 15, 20 minutes, you're welcome to do that. But I also want to give you one more question that I want to kind of just hear from you about. And that is, what do you wish I had asked you? What would you like to say that you don't feel like you've had an opportunity to say so far this evening? And Crystal, why don't you start us out?
I wish you'd ask me to share a link to a horrible bill, HB 846, that's going to be on the docket tomorrow, which will limit me from being a community bail person. It will require me to pay $900 every 2 years to recertify. It will use the money I put up for somebody for their fines, court costs, and restitution, which that is not something bail's bondsmen do. It will limit me to only bailing out 5 people within 180 days, which I'm not bailing people out every day. Like, it's not like this overabundance, like I'm just at the courthouse all day slinging money. That's not the case. Um, but we did have a fundraiser. So right now I'm just doing Venmo and Cash App to be just saying that's people send me money and I buy the credits with it. I'm not living lavish or anything off of anybody's money. Promise. Um, but I'm not sure where I was gonna. Oh, the nonprofit. I'm not sure what I was gonna say about that. But yeah, I'm not sure what I was gonna say about that. But yes, the HB 846 is a main concern for tomorrow. It is gonna be on the docket. I can try to share a link in here. You can comment on it to oppose it. You can virtually sign up to speak out against it. I wish I could remember that one part about that bill. But anyway, if I think of it, I'll put it in the notes. But it is a pretty grimy bill and would appreciate any support on that.
Thank you. Really. Thank you, Crystal. And please do put in whatever you're comfortable sharing, your Venmo address or whatever you'd like to share. We're happy to receive it. Heather, what about you? What should I have asked you that I didn't?
Well, I'm thinking about a ton of resources, and I'm also thinking about, this is all about visioning, right? So, the question is like, what is the vision? What is our collective vision for this? And how do we sit in the space of being for what it takes for this to live and to exist? And how do we continue to cultivate that? So that's something that I'm thinking about. I'm a teacher, so I'm really pragmatic, but I'm about the backward design, right? So what's the big vision, and how do we actually get there, and how do we do that together? And so a vision that I hold is really focusing in on how do we work. I've always been a person who's been very committed to grassroots work, right? That's just been my heart. But what I learned is through working through, and I really feel you, Judge Gino, about like moving systems and moving people. And as a teacher, I could like go under the radar. Like I've done so many, I feel like I've been subversive for so long. And now I feel like I'm living out loud with this work. So I could just get away with doing a lot of stuff, and then we would just do it, right? So but I want to, I lost my train of thought. I just saw your face. I can appreciate you, Judge Gino. And Crystal, you too. Anyway, the whole idea of how do we as a collective imagine, you know, what it would take for us to care within our communities when we think about like harm reduction, and really how harm reduction really came from a place of people who were working in this, who were sex workers, people who were on the streets, right? And so there was a degree of community that was created and developed, right? And so there's so much community living all over. So how do we work together to create a space where we have ways to support, create mental health support, to create safety, like physical safety, like street medics, right? So how do we work together to, when there's a community issue, to have people in the community? My students had an idea about having a circle keeper app, Ramsey Braden. We could have a circle keeper app, like here's a circle keeper in your neighborhood. If something goes down, call this person. Like how do we co-create these ways for communities for us to take care of ourselves? But then who's working in the system? Because there's people who are in the system, and how do we love and support the people who are there? And I think about like my friend Ray Mendoza, who's looking at working with people who are currently incarcerated, holding circles and teaching that work there, right? So how do we just like reimagine from the inside out? So that's a longer question. And I wanted to share with you, I don't know if you've read the book Until We Reckon by Danielle Sered. She has an organization in Common Justice. I think that's a really good resource. Vermont has the program that they've developed, and they have a website that there's a lot of information there. Also, Dane County has a diversion program. They have an organization that works with young people. It's called Briar Patch, and then they have it is funded. I think it's by the state, where this is a program, because one of the things that we learned in doing this work is that if young people are going to be facilitating, that they need support. So like if people have a diversion, that there is a person who's a trained social worker who's trained in this work, who takes their case and works with them to look at what happened, what do they need, what are the supports, and then how does the real harm happen. There's, in Milwaukee, we used to have a time bank when there was an issue, so people could exchange time as a way of offering a reparation. So I'm kind of all over the place, but thinking about what are these community systems, and there are models in different spaces. And I'll have to, one thing I want to say is working and organizing to shut down the youth detention facilities. I've seen young people come out of those spaces so traumatized and so harmed, and have gone in so traumatized and so harmed. And that's one thing that Danielle Sered talks about in her book, the isolation, the trauma, and how that just happens and continues in that carceral space. So I think the more that we look at what's happening, and how do we, especially in this political climate, how do we as a collective come together and look at how do we do this for our babies? And how do we live this way in our homes? And when I talk about the big picture, it can feel overwhelming, but I just invite us all to look at how can we learn and practice this work in our homes. I've raised my children this way. And then how do we bring this to our church spaces? How do we bring this to our meeting spaces? And so how does this work live within us? Because we're talking about a way of being where we're connected to ourselves and each other, and committed to our own healing and transformation, and walking with others.
Wow. Thank you, Heather. I'm looking at the time. I think what we ought to do is take a couple of these questions that have come up in the chat, and some of them are directed specifically at folks. So I'll just ask you to be mindful that we're going to try and do this rapid fire. Friends who are watching, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll do as many as we can in the next 6 or 7 minutes. And I'll ask you all who are answering the questions to answer them as quickly and briefly as you can, so we can get to as many as possible. So I backed up on my own chat, and I see a question from Dexter for Judge Gino, which was, when wanting to change a system such as the one you're in, what have you found is successful in getting those changes to happen, even incrementally?
Bull in the China shop approach. You just do it, and some of it, sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. So you sort of bend it to try to get it done.
That's a great answer. And Darcy had a question that I think any of you could give an answer to if you'd like. How can those of us who are on support teams advocate and work to change the system that has so deeply harmed our loved ones, those folks who have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated? Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Start a pen pal program. Got a whole bunch of people signed up. Just don't have people willing to write little things like that. Because
Mm,
while people are in there, I feel like it's important for them to feel visible and reminded, and they're not forgotten about. Um, and then when they get out, like, the judge is doing good work, and Heather and these groups doing good work once they get out. But I don't know how much outreach is going on while they're in there.
One of the issues we have is, of course, building trust, because nobody that comes into our docket has had good experiences in the court system. And it probably takes half of our time to develop some rapport with them. So I took the behavioral health team, the docket, bowling last week, just to give them something different to do, because most of them had never been. And, some small things like that. I mean, I think you just have to keep trying to do things to work outside the box and get things done.
great. Heather, do you want to add anything to that, or should we move on to the next question?
I saw somebody asking a question. I wanted to say what's really important, I think, is that we think about the essence of this work, which is community building, right? Rather than going and thinking about repair harm only. I mean, I'm like, real talk. I've been a high school teacher for so long. Sometimes we build community by repairing the harm because we in some mess, right? Like that's how it happens, right? But I think when we're talking about this work, it's important that we have a foundation in really attention to building community and having clear systems in place where people are practicing. So I think the more that we all learn and practice, I think the better off we'll be, because this work is something I'm thinking about. Restorative practice, restorative justice in particular. This is, like I said, a way of being, a way of living. And the only way that we can understand what it is to practice it. And then when we're in our various spaces, whether it's a classroom or whether it's whatever the case may be. I was teaching a class at a college, right? And I worked with my students to look at what are our collective values and what are our community agreements working together. And then we talked about how we're going to deal with, how we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and what we would like from others to help us hold ourselves accountable, what support would be like when we're getting off track. So like being really clear about what we want and what we need. And so someone was talking about doing this in a college. It's always, whenever I'm working with an organization, we always focus on how are the ways that you build community. And then we think about how do we also deal with repairing harm. Because if we only focus this on as repair harm work, we can end up really causing more disparity. And there was a study done in 2019 about schools, and it was mostly our Black and brown young people who were sent to restorative justice, and it turned into a punitive measure rather than something transformative that was part of the whole community. So wow. I want to just say that is really an important piece in this work, community building.
Gosh, what a great place to try and draw our conversation to a close. We're about building community. At the end of the day, that's the heart of the work that we're doing. And I hear that coming through so strongly from all three of you. And I want to note that Matt Hackworth asked a question way back earlier in the evening, or kind of, I think, really lifted up a lament as far as it's kind of what I would call it. And I just want to note it without trying to comment on it as we close, saying, I'm sitting in a state that incarcerates more people than any democratic country on the planet. Where on earth do we begin to address the sheer scale of the prison industrial complex at work in Mississippi? And so, Matt, without trying to go, because we're really out of time, I just want to honor the question you've asked and note that I think Heather's framing right here at the end around the task of building community is at the heart of what all three folks have shared with us tonight, and how grateful I am for that. So as we close, I want to do two things that you all can help with. The first, I'm going to ask two questions, one at a time, and I'd like you to just put quick answers in the chat and share them with all of us. So the first question is just an opportunity for you to share your love and appreciation for Crystal and Judge Gino and Heather this evening. So if you just take a moment, I'll be in silence for the next 20 or seconds or so and just let you all appreciate the evening together. That's great. Thank you all. And then the last one, and I'm not going to close quite yet because I also want to give some instructions about where to go next for y'all who would like to be more involved. But if you could all just take a moment also and list in the chat a word or a phrase that kind of signifies where you're feeling led after this hour that we've spent together this evening. Hey, friends. So we're coming to the close of our time together this evening. And Deanna, I wonder if you could just repost that little section that has some links for folks so that because it went by quickly, that has kind of next steps and where people can support ending cash bail, getting involved on Facebook, and the Presbyterians for Abolition page on the Peace Fellowship website. And Lori, I want to invite you back in to ask if there's anything that you'd like to say in terms of helping people get connected and where we go from here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I put my email in the chat there, but I'll put it in one more time. Or you can just connect with us on at info@presbypeacefellowship.org. But really, our Presbyterians for Abolition work, like Rick said, is always in transformation, and we are always eager to partner with folks, build this network, see how we can help resource folks. So if you have any inkling of being involved in this movement, and you clearly do, or you wouldn't be here tonight, please reach out and we will get you connected to the next meeting of Presbyterians for Abolition. Even if you're not Presbyterian, we would be delighted to have you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, and to our guests, thank you so much for the incredible work that you're doing. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Lori. And I'll just add my gratitude. Crystal and Heather and Judge Gino, you've inspired me, and I'm grateful, and I suspect that I'm not alone. So thank you for spending the time with us this evening. We're really, really, all of us, very grateful for that. And Deanna, do we have a song queued up? Are we going to try and do this? At one point I saw in the notes that we might try and close with Calypso from Sweet Honey. Is that on
I
the...
have a song ready to play if people want to listen as they go, or
So in answer to the question I saw float by in the chat, we'll close with this song. We'll call it our closing prayer. You may stay through the end of the song if you like, or if you need to go, that's fine. And you can use the time to scroll up and down the chat and grab the links that you'd like to grab. Thank you
And
all for coming this evening.
I just want to say one final thank you to our awesome panelists. And if they want to drop their contact info in the chat for people to snag, if people wanted to follow up, I know Crystal put hers in earlier, but if people wanted to follow up and you're comfortable, panelists, with putting your info in the chat, I know people that have further questions or would like to follow up would love to connect with you. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. So Deanna, go ahead.
Freedom's coming and it won't be long. Freedom, freedom, no. Freedom's coming and it won't be long. Well, I took a trip on a Greyhound. Freedom's coming and it won't be long. I got to fight segregation now. This we must. Freedom's coming and it won't. I got to fight segregation around the nation now. It's coming and it won't be long. We got to keep on fighting. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. Well, I took a trip down to Alabama. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. Oh, we met a lot of violence on Mother's Day. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. But I'm scared. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. I got to freedom. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. Well, on to Mississippi we go. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. All the blue-shirted policemen, they beat off at the door. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. I'm scared of it. They can wear pretty shirts on well, you can hinder me here, you can hinder me there. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. But I go right down on my knees and pray. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. I will pray for freedom. I wish it would it's coming and it won't be long. I keep a fighting for freedom, keep a marching for freedom. It's coming and it won't be long. Yeah, my freedom is coming and it won't be long. Oh, my freedom is coming and it won't be long.